Hey, I'm Kai from Flamenco Explained, and in this video we are going to look at one of the really confusing questions that comes up as you learn chords in flamenco, which is, what do I call a chord if I'm using a capo? So if I'm in one of the different keys, in other words, we talk about playing por medio, por arriba, and taranta, and all these keys, and we know the names of the chords, but then we put the capo on, so what do we call the chords? And understanding this is really helpful for something called transposing, or knowing how to play the same thing in a different key. And I'm putting key in quotes because we're going to talk about what we mean when we say key, because that's not really the right word to use, but it's also kind of the word that we use. So the basic thing that I want to start with is the idea that in open position we learn the names of the chords, right? And when we don't have a capo on, the names of the chords are pretty correct, right? So if I say that this is a B flat, it's because this is B flat and that's the root of that chord, and this is an A, right? There's also a B flat here, and that's going to be important in a minute. So if I play this chord, I'm going to call it A, right? And I'm not going to get into the different kinds of A chords that we can play and all the different kinds of flavors of chords, because I've done that in a video called Flamenco Guitar Voicings Explained. So that's like half an hour of me talking about all the different kinds of chords we can use. But here we're just going to talk about this basic idea of what do we call the chord once we're using a capo, because it gets really confusing, but it doesn't need to be. The most basic example that I think we should look at to start is the idea of por medio, right, which is A Phrygian, and por arriba, which is E Phrygian. So if you play a little flamenco, you probably know these chords, some sort of B flat going to A, and also some sort of F going to E, right? And these chords are named based on the roots, right? This is the note B flat, this is the note A, this is the note F, and that's the chord F, and this is E, and that's an E chord. However, remember this, B flat to A, right? But the way the guitar is built, a lot of the notes repeat in different places. So I can play B flat to A, and then I can play B flat to A, same exact notes, but played on a different place in the guitar. So how do we use this? So B flat to A here, B flat to A here. If I put a capo on at the 5th fret, something interesting happens, right? B flat to A. So we're going to think of this as open, right? It's not really open. Open is without a capo. But this is now the open string. I'm not fretting anything, right? So we have B flat to A. However, when I play these shapes, right, this left hand, we're going to call this a chord shape. Some people call them grips. If I play this shape, it sure looks like an F, right? And this sure looks like an E. So is this still a B flat and an A? Or is it an F and an E? And that's really the heart of what we're getting at today. Most guitarists, I would say all flamenco guitarists, I've never met a flamenco guitarist who would call this a B flat, right? A piano player would call it a B flat because they're not dealing with capos and they're not dealing with shapes. I mean, they are, but this, you know, whether I play a B flat here or I play it over here makes no difference to almost any other instrument. But on the guitar and with the capo, it gets confusing. So the bottom line of this whole video is that we're going to call this an F and this an E, because that's how guitarists think, and that's certainly how flamenco guitarists think. Some classical guitarists might completely disagree with me, but in general, guitarists are going to think of this as an F. Why? Because of this shape, right? Because without the capo, if I play this shape, that's an F. Right, so do I really want to think about, okay, I have the capo at the 5th fret, this is really a B flat and this is an E, so even though this looks like an F, I'm going to call it a B flat. I could do that, but we don't. In flamenco, we don't do that. And a lot of guitarists, I would say, don't do that. And also, when you're talking to a flamenco singer or another flamenco guitarist, they're not going to say B flat. They would say B flat if you were here and then you came here. This would be called a B flat because we're thinking in these terms. Right? But once we have the capo on, everything changes. And basically what happens is, with the capo on, this becomes your E, this becomes your A, this becomes your D, this becomes your G, your B, and your E. In other words, we pretend that this is the nut. So now, if it looks like an F, it is an F. And if it looks like an E, it is an E. with the capo here, if I said play a B flat, right? Any flamenco guitarist would go here or would go here to play B flat to A, even though we're really playing E flat to D, but don't even think about that, right? That doesn't matter. The important thing is once the capo's on, we pretend we don't have a capo on and that we're over here. So how is this information useful to us as flamenco guitarists? The really cool thing that we can start to see once we understand this concept is that the two things still kind of go together. In other words, the fact that we're calling it F to E, right? But in the back of our minds, we know that these notes, right, that this A is the same as this A. So anything that I can play in this key, I can then put on the capo. So this is my root, right? That's what I'm resolving to. I can come to the 5th fret and do that here. Remember our sound was bum, bum, bum. Right, so if I put the capo on here and I play bum, bum, bum. Now, anything I was playing in that key, I can play in this key. Right? And we're going to do another video where I show you how to use this when you're accompanying a singer, which is some really cool stuff. Let's take it one step further because there are different bunches of grips. They're different, we call them keys, right? But they're not, right? We established that, you know, if I play the A here and I play the E here, technically it's the same key. It's the same note that we're resolving to, but we're calling this F to E. Now, if I do this, if I move the capo down to the 3rd fret, why would I do this? The reason I would do this is because there's this, right, is still in absolute terms, bum, bum, right? If that's where the singer wants to sing, dun, dun, I can do the taranta key. We're not thinking of this as B flat to A, right? Because if this were open, this would be F sharp. So we're thinking G, right? That looks like a G chord. This looks like an F sharp chord. And so we're going to call them that. And any flamenco guitarist is going to call this a G and this an F sharp, even though technically it's still B flat to A. And if I'm doing, remember we had bum, 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 I can do bum, bum, bum. Same absolute key, but I'm using different grips. Why would we use different grips? The key to that is really, you can hear it best in this key, I think, right? This just sounds really different from those other keys. And the reason for that is a very guitar-y kind of explanation. It's that the people who played flamenco originally weren't thinking about music theory. They weren't thinking about, you know, how do we make these chords and how do we transpose? They were really just, as a lot of us do, playing with the sounds. So these two notes are open here, but they play a very different role than the open strings do here, right? These two strings are open here, but it sounds very different. So if we analyze these chords, I'm trying to avoid talking about theory in this video. If we did talk about theory, we would see that the notes that we're adding to the chords are different notes. And so they give you a different sound if you're playing this, right? So this, the resolution is still bum, bum. So the singer would still be in the same absolute key, right? But that sounds different than this. And that sounds different than, right? So these are all the same key. Every time I'm resolving dun, 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 and then capo here, dun, dun. But they're different groups of shapes that we use to get different sounds out of the guitar, even though we are in exactly the same key, right? So the only time you need to think B flat to A is if the singer says, for example, I want you to play without a capo, por medio, right? And you're saying to yourself, okay, but I don't want to play, I want to play this key, right? The key of A, but I want to play it somewhere else on the guitar because I don't want it to sound like por medio. I want it to sound like por arriba. So if I want it to sound like this, but be in this key, that's when I would put the capo here, right? and go bum, bum, but because I have a different set of voicings, now it's a different sound. So once I've found my root, I'm good. And now I don't have to think about B flat to A anymore. I think about F and E. Or if I was in Taranta, I think about G and F sharp. Because that's really just the easiest way to think about these chords. So all of this information is going to be really useful for our next video, where we're going to look at how to apply this stuff. In other words, if the singer wants to sing in the key that they're comfortable in, and you want to have different ways to accompany them, this becomes very useful because you can say, okay, they want B flat to A, but I want to play it like this. So we're going to get into a little bit of how you figure out where to put the capo and what grips and shapes to use for that.